What's up, guys? It's your boy, the Essential John L. Crossfire, aka The Real Main Event, aka The Rogue Soldier, and today you're about to learn firsthand just what it's like to be caught in the crossfire. But above all else, prepare yourself, because in this very moment, today, right now, you are about to be caught in conversation. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 24 of Caught in Conversation. As always, I am your host, the Essential John L. Crossfire, and today we have our second Q&A on the pod later on in the episode. And this episode, it was kind of just chucked together. I've kind of pulled it out of my ass, not going to lie. I'm hoping you guys enjoy it though, because I did have a lot of fun putting this together, as random as it is. I have been to the dentist twice this week, and I picked up an extra shift at work, so I didn't really have time to kind of put much planning into this episode. So I'm just hoping for the best. I'm hoping you guys enjoy it. We haven't watched any wrestling, or any current wrestling, I should say, this week. Both myself and Mrs. Crossfire, we've kind of agreed that we won't be watching anything from WWE, especially until Survivor Series next weekend. We've been watching a lot of old school WWE with a lot of old Survivor Series matches though, like trying to get some inspiration for the card we're going to be doing next week on the episode. But this week, I've decided that I'm going to do some of my own fantasy Survivor Series teams from other pop culture mediums, and hopefully I can keep you guys entertained for, half an hour to an hour. In a way though, I feel this will be a good precursor into next week's episode with Mrs. Crossfire that I just mentioned, where we will be doing our own fantasy card for Survivor Series 2021, respectively. We're doing one each, kind of match by match. We're going to compare who has the best opener, who has the best main event, and who has the best overall card. Should be fun. Some healthy married competition. Before that, though, myself and Mrs. Crossfire, we watched The Hitman's Wife's Bodyguard this week, and we both enjoyed the heck out of it. Now, a sequel can make or break a series/franchise, but honestly, we both thought that this one was actually way better than the first one, which is still a really good film in its own right. And we're really, really excited for the third installment, which won't actually start filming until at least 2023 now, though, because Ryan Reynolds has announced that he's taking a hiatus from filmmaking, which, big sad there, but everyone deserves a break now and then. Our binging of Superstore on Netflix has continued, though. We're up to season 4. I think we're about midway through season 4 as I record this, and it's just such a freaking good show, man. Like, I honestly don't think that there's a character that I don't like, except the ones that, are written to be dicks. But even then, the wrestling mind in me appreciates the execution of those characters and just how well done they are. So hats off to everyone involved in this TV show. Like, no matter how big or small their roles are, everyone does a great job. All the actors deserve a round of applause. Yay. I think the character of Garrett thus far has definitely solidified himself as my favorite, alongside Dina, Mateo, and Brett too, though. And if you guys have seen that, you're probably in the same boat. Like, they're just such good characters. But if you haven't seen this show, seriously go check it out. The casting is just great all around. It's full of laughs, drama, and it's just a really good way to kill time. Like, I don't know how many times we've done the whole just one more episode thing, and then the amount of times, we've gone to turn it off, and it's just like, we need to know what happens next. Again, seriously, just check it out, guys. Like, it's on Netflix, at least for those here in Aussie land. I don't know where it is elsewhere around the world, but Superstore, go check it out. It's fucking hysterical, at least in mine and Mrs. Crossfire's opinion. I've been playing a shitload of Dragonball Z Kakarot in the spare time that I have had, usually late at night when Mrs. Crossfire is fast asleep, and that combined with some of the older Survivor Series stuff that I just mentioned that I've been showing Mrs. Crossfire that she hadn't had the pleasure of seeing yet, it just kind of got me thinking, while I was playing it, about if Dragon Ball Universe had more of a pro wrestling style with their tournaments, or if they were, somehow transported into a pro wrestling setting, who and what teams would we have? So I threw together a few of them, some which are kind of obvious choices, some which as I said, are very random, but I did have fun, once again, throwing them together nonetheless. I'm going to be doing some Marvel and DC ones as well, But for all these, we're just going to assume that we're in a universe where everyone is somewhat evenly matched, because some, characters in their respective franchises can be a bit overpowered at times. A lot of these I did just kind of wing as well, especially with the outcomes, because it was kind of like 3 a.m. when I wrote most of them. But hey, this podcast, it's always been about mindless rambling. It literally says it in the description, so you get what you sign up for. I made that joke last week. I'm making it again. I think it might have even been the week before that. But this is a free podcast. This is just me sitting in a room, talking into a microphone, so you get what you're given. Some characters will repeat in matches too, but it's a fantasy world, so maybe we can say they're not all necessarily on the same card at the same time if you want. The song of the week this week. Before we get into any of that, and just me straight up nerding out, the song of the week is War Machine by Kiss. This song, while being a banger in its own right, and Kiss, in my opinion, are the single greatest rock band of all time. Some of you may agree, some of you may disagree. That's okay. But this song is actually the ECW theme of Taz with 1Z. For those that actually pay attention to the episode names, I have named this one Survive If I Let You, and that's actually a paraphrase from Taz's catchphrase of Beat Me If You Can, Survive If I Let You. Of course, this is a very Survive-heavy episode, being a Survivor Series related, theme. And it kind of ties in with one of the questions that I marked at the tail end of the episode as well. So it's all, all wrapped up in a neat little package with a beautiful little bow. But that song, after all of that rambling, is War Machine by Kiss. Banger alert. But let's just get straight into it. My fantasy booking of Dragon Ball Z, Marvel, and DC. The Dragon Ball Z Survivor Series team/matches that I came up with are as follows. Match number 1, Cell Juniors versus the Cybermen. Now, there's 7 Cell Juniors in the Cell Game saga, and Cybermen, in theory, can have almost an infinite amount, depending on where they grow. But in the interest of fairness in this fantasy world, rather than do a traditional 4-on-4, or 5 versus 5, I'm going to allow all 7 of the Cell Juniors to compete in a 7 versus 7 elimination matchup against 7 of the best fertilized Cybermen growing out there. I believe in canon across the series and the video games, there's 5 official different colors of the Cybermen. I could be wrong, it might be 6, but from memory of, watching the show and playing Kakarot as of late, being, fresh in my mind, I believe it's 5, but maybe we'll say there's 1 of each color if it is 5, and then an extra 2 of the main green ones. And I think it comes down to all 3 of the green Cybermen against 2 of the Cell Juniors, but the Cell Juniors make a comeback. They're the baby faces in this situation for some reason. They're both heels teams. I'm going to make one of them a face. Cell Juniors the face. They make a comeback and get the victory after being down 2-3. The 2 Cell Juniors survive, picking up the win for the rest of their team. Again, as I said, this is just super fucking random. You're probably tuned out already. Maybe I'm the only one listening to myself. Who knows? But match number 2, we have heroes versus villains. Pretty straightforward idea here, yeah? The heroes side, I have Goku, Adult Gohan, Krillin, Future Trunks, and Piccolo versus the villain team of Frieza, Cell, Raditz, Babidi, and Dabura. Again, super random, but Dabura is low-key one of my favorite villains in the entire DBZ franchise. He should have got way more time than he did, but that's just me. The high points of this would be a 3-on-2 in favor of the villains. We have Goku and Piccolo outnumbered by Frieza, Cell, and Dabura. Goku eliminates Frieza with a Spirit Bomb, a la Keith Lee. Remember, this is a wrestling type setting, so it's a big sit-out power bomb, making it 2-on-2. But Cell eliminates Goku, making it 2-on-1. Piccolo rolls up Cell after taking a massive beating. Dabura gets too cocky, telling Piccolo that he, Dabura, is the true Demon King. And then Piccolo fires up, and he wins clean in the middle. Piccolo is the sole survivor. Match number 3. I deemed past, present, and future. I have Teen Gohan, Gotenks, Master Roshi, Grandpa Gohan and Android 8. And of course, Grandpa Gohan is Goku's grandfather, who, the Gohan we know and love was named after. And they are versing the Great Saiyaman, Adult Goten, Krillin with hair, Yamcha, and Dr. Gero. Android 8 is eliminated first by Dr. Gero, but Master Roshi and Grandpa Gohan take out Krillin and Yamcha. Adult Goten takes out both Master Roshi and Grandpa Gohan by himself, and after a bit of miscommunication, Dr. Gero takes out Teen Gohan in what some would be consider a massive upset. It's 2-on-1, but Gotenks does whatever the wrestling equivalent of Super Saiyan 3 is. Probably just a Hulk up, and I didn't realize at the time that I've probably written this like 3 times in a row. Like, technically they were all comebacks. Oops. But he does whatever the wrestling equivalent of Super Saiyan 3 is, and he steamrolls through both Dr. Gero and Adult Goten to become the sole survivor. Match number 4, I deemed Era versus Era. I have Kid Goku, Super Saiyan God 2 Vegeta, Krillin, Future Trunks, and Kid Trunks versus Super Saiyan God 2 Goku, Majin Vegeta, Krillin with hair, Teen Gohan, and Adult Gohan. Now this one's all over the place. The ring's barely able to contain the action. Everyone just brawling all over the place. There's some great teamwork here between the two versions of Trunks, and the same for the two versions of Gohan. Kid Goku actually eliminates Super Saiyan God 2 Goku early on with a surprise inside cradle, much to the shock of everyone, including Kid Goku himself. It eventually comes down to a 3-on-1 situation with Majin Vegeta, Teen Gohan, and Adult Gohan. Teen Gohan gets a blind tag, and Majin Vegeta sacrifices himself, much like he does with Majin Buu in the actual series, minus the explosion, since again, this is a fantasy wrestling setting. This allows the two versions of Gohan to hit some double team offense before Majin Vegeta is able to tag himself back in and steal the victory for his team. I forgot to write who they actually pinned. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, Kid Goku, seeing as how he had the big elimination of Super Saiyan God 2 Goku early on. Match number 5, we had a handicap match. We have an enhancement talent match here, folks. We have a 1 versus 4 elimination match. We have Majin Buu versus Yamcha, Tien, Chaozu, and Mr. Satan / Hercule, depending on what you prefer to call him. Majin Buu clean sweeps Yamcha, Tien, and Chaozu with a monstrous chokeslam each, and then Hercule runs away, getting himself counted out, making Majin Buu the clear victor in an absolute dominant fashion. And for those playing at home, yes, I did just completely rip that off from Big Show versus Team Boss Man at Survivor Series 99. Sue me. Match number 6 in the Dragon Ball Survivor Series matches, as we transition away from Dragon Ball into the superheroes, is Goku versus Superman. Now, obviously, that's always a very big debate, so I figured, why not make it into a wrestling-themed Survivor Series tag team match involving the both of them? So Team Goku, I have Goku as the team captain, obviously, Vegeta, Teen Gohan, Gotenks, and Piccolo, versus Team Superman, with Superman as the team captain, The Flash, Wonder Woman, Shazam, and Martian Manhunter. Martian Manhunter and Piccolo were the first two eliminated. They brawl to a double countout. Gotenks takes out Shazam just to be blindsided and eliminated by the Flash. Teen Gohan eliminates the Flash. Wonder Woman eliminates Vegeta, but she gets DQ'd after she just loses her shit on Goku. Superman eliminates Goku off the Wonder Woman assist. For the record, in the actual Goku versus Superman debate, I do think Goku wins, but this is wrestling. Then, via surprise roll-up to win the match and become the sole survivor, Teen Gohan defeats Superman. As I said, this was all just thrown together, so if this is just a complete waste and I'm mumbling and I'm rambling, my bad. I had fun putting it together. I'm trying to be entertaining. But let's segue from the Goku versus Superman into straight-up DC comic-themed Survivor Series matches. Now, for the DC and the coming Marvel ones, I'm not going to do like the winners of these, and if I do, it's not going to be super detailed. Some teams may be a little bit predictable or obvious, but what can you do with so many great characters? Like, there's literally thousands of characters in both franchises. I mean, Dragon Ball has hundreds of characters in its own right as well, but some of these also may seem a little bit random, much like the DBZ ones. But again, I threw these together as they came to me at like 3 in the morning. But who knows, maybe you guys can let me know who you think would win these matches. And even with the Dragon Ball Z ones that I just mentioned, maybe you could tell me how you'd book it, sort of thing. This first match in the DC, saga, I'm going to call it a saga because I was just talking about Dragon Ball Z. This first match in the DC saga is Battle of the Sexes, some good old-fashioned intergender wrestling. Well, it's not really old-fashioned, but you get the point. We have Harley Quinn, Wonder Woman, Poison Ivy, Hawkgirl, and Green Lantern Jessica Cruz versus Superman, Joker, Mr. Freeze, Hawkman, and Green Lantern Hal Jordan. I think that the girls win here, but I'm being biased because Harley Quinn is my all-time favorite DC character. But yeah, I think that the girls get the win there. I'm going to say that Harley Quinn was the sole survivor too. Come at me. The second match in this DC saga is heroes versus villains. We have Cyborg, The Flash, Green Arrow, Nightwing, and Beast Boy versus Lex Luthor, the Penguin, the Riddler, Bane, and Deathstroke. Just for the sake of the argument, I'm going to say that Bane and Deathstroke are the sole survivors. Heroes versus Villains Part 2. We have Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, and Aquaman versus Darkseid, Doomsday, Reverse Flash, Sinestro, and Two-Face. I don't know who I'd want to win out of that. You tell me who should win. Obviously, the villain side is pretty stacked, but as I said, we're picturing this in a universe where everyone is, semi-evenly matched. We don't want it to be too overpowered, and I probably shot myself in the foot by putting Darkseid and Doomsday together, but whatever. We need some definitive heels here. Heroes versus Villains Part 3. I had the Justice League, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, and Cyborg versus Lex Luthor, the Joker, Harley Quinn, Bane, and Deathstroke. Now that's one it's a pretty obvious one. And again, Harley Quinn's my girl, so I'm saying the villains somehow pull out the victory. And then as we transition into the Marvel portion, I'll do some DC versus Marvel, or Marvel versus DC. Say it in whichever order you want. I personally prefer Marvel, but I appreciate DC. I'm still a fan of DC. I think the obvious one here has to be the Justice League versus the Avengers, but there's so many different potential mashups just from that alone as well when you factor in the timelines. Like pretty much any hero could be considered as part of the Justice League or the Avengers depending on which multiverse we're in. So don't come at me with, this person isn't in the Justice League or this person isn't in the Avengers. It's a fantasy world. Shut up. But Justice League versus the Avengers. I have Justice League is Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, and Green Lantern versus Captain America, Iron Man, Hulk, Black Panther, and Captain Marvel. Justice League versus the Avengers Part 2. I have Aquaman, Cyborg, Martian Manhunter, Hawkgirl, and Green Arrow versus Black Widow, Thor, Hawkeye, Vision, and Falcon. And then I did Justice League versus the X-Men, which was Batman, The Flash, Hawkgirl, Hawkman, and Cyborg versus Wolverine, Jean Grey, Rogue, Quicksilver, and Cyclops. I really wanted to add Storm to the X-Men here. So maybe we could add, make it a 6-man and possibly add Shazam to the Justice League side. But it was either Storm or Rogue, and Rogue kind of won out. But if you wanted to, you could make it a 6 versus 6. Justice League versus the Guardians of the Galaxy, Green Lantern, Martian Manhunter, Cyborg, Supergirl, and Aquaman versus Star-Lord, Drax, Gamora, Groot, and Mantis. Again, in my heart, I want to say the Guardians of the Galaxy, but I feel like the Justice League pretty much wins that by a landslide, but I thought it was a cool lineup as I was writing it. You got the Teen Titans versus the Guardians of the Galaxy. I've got Robin, Beastman, Cyborg, Raven, and Starfire versus Rocket Raccoon, Groot, Drax, Yondu, and Nebula. I think Rocket Raccoon and Drax are the two survivors there. And to round it out, before I get to the Marvel-specific ones, I'm going to do some Ultimate Marvel vs. DC team or teams with any and all characters from the respective sides up for grabs. If characters repeat themselves in this one, my bad. As I've already said, let's just pretend that it's on a different card somewhere else down the line. But Ultimate Marvel vs. DC villains. I have match number 1, Ultron, Doc Ock, Abomination, Red Skull and Doctor Doom versus General Zod, Brainiac, Darkseid, Black Adam, and Sinestro. Ultimate Marvel vs. DC Villains Part 2, Thanos, Loki, Magneto, Electro, and Ronan the Accuser versus Solomon Grundy, Killer Croc, Scarecrow, Deadshot, and Deathstroke. And now for no theme other than just Ultimate Marvel vs. DC. Any and all characters. Spider-Man, Iron Man, Green Goblin, Scarlet Witch, and Captain Marvel versus Catwoman, Bane, Raven, Starfire, and Green Lantern John Stewart. Ultimate Marvel vs. DC Part 2. Hulk, She-Hulk, The Thing, Abomination and Groot versus Gorilla Grodd, Solomon Grundy, Doomsday, King Shark, and Bane. It's a battle of the big boys. Or I should say, the heavyweights, seeing as how, She-Hulk is in there as well. Ultimate Marvel vs. DC Part 3. I had Winter Soldier, Falcon, Iron Man, War Machine, and Captain America versus Red Hood, Nightwing, Mr. Freeze, Lobo, and Batman. And the final Marvel vs. DC one before I go into just the Marvel ones. And honestly, I could have kept going, but I didn't want to drag this episode out too long with just all this rambling, my bad. So I kind of had to force myself to stop. But Ultimate Marvel vs. DC Part 4, and this was the big one. This is the main event. We got Thanos, Thor, Doctor Strange, Wolverine, and Deadpool versus Lex Luthor, Sinestro, Martian Manhunter, Nightwing, and Deathstroke. Obviously, Deadpool basically was a ripoff of Deathstroke, so I kind of had to have those two against each other. Sinestro, I like, the whole evil Yellow Lantern thing. We'll say that for the sake of argument that Thanos has whatever the wrestling equivalent of the Reality Stone to kind of match, the Yellow Lantern's ring. And the rest I just think would be a cool, nice little contrast against each other. Again, no really rhyme or reason for a lot of these, but I tried to make sense of it in certain aspects. But for the Marvel's exclusive Survivor Series matches, I had a 15-person tag, but it was actually a triple threat. So 5 versus 5 versus 5. I had the Avengers versus the X-Men versus the Guardians of the Galaxy. Again, pretty obvious on paper, but for the Avengers here, I had Captain America, Thor, Iron Man, Hulk, and Black Widow. The X-Men, I had Wolverine, Jean Grey, Storm, Colossus, and Professor X. And for the Guardians of the Galaxy, I had Star-Lord, Rocket Raccoon, Drax, Gamora, and Nebula. And then I did like Heroes versus Heroes Marvel Survivor Series matches, kind of like a Civil War style, which still one of the better Marvel movies that they've done. But Spider-Man, Ant-Man, The Wasp, Black Panther, and Wolverine, you see the theme in that one there, versus Iron Man, Star-Lord, Mr. Fantastic, Daredevil, and Luke Cage. Heroes vs. Heroes Part 2, Numero Dos, was Captain America, Falcon, Captain Marvel, Ms. Marvel, and the Human Torch. And just for the sake of comedy, both Captain America and Human Torch are the Chris Evans versions of those characters. Versus Bucky Barnes, Black Panther, Storm, Ghost Rider, and Iron Fist. As I keep saying, some of these kind of have a theme, others are very random at times. I'm just trying to entertain. Fantastic Four versus the Spider-Verse. I had Mr. Fantastic, The Thing, Human Torch, Invisible Woman, Fantastic Four. And joining them just to make it a 5-person team was Doctor Strange versus Spider-Man, Spider-Gwen, Scarlet Spider, Spider-Man Noir, and Spider-Ham, aka Peter Porker. And Spider-Ham goes ham here, destroys everyone, steamrolls. Spider-Verse wins 5-0, but Spider-Ham did all the work. Just because, fuck it, comedy, why not? And then I did an anti-heroes team. I had Daredevil, The Punisher, Venom, Jessica Jones, and Cable versus Deadpool, Wolverine, Ghost Rider, Blade, and the Winter Soldier. Villains versus villains, Ultron, Doctor Doom, The Collector, Mysterio, and Galactus versus Thanos, Green Goblin, Carnage, Red Skull, and Vulture. And then, heroes versus villains is a pretty obvious one, but I only did 3 of these because, again, could have gone on for ages, and you're probably just listening to me list these names like, do something, but sorry. Heroes versus villains. I had Ant-Man, the Wasp, Hawkeye, Iceman, and Iron Fist versus Yellow Jacket, Killmonger, Annihilus, Pyro, and Kraven the Hunter. Heroes versus Villains Part 2. I had Iron Man, Ironheart, Iron Patriot, War Machine, and Bruce Banner with the Hulkbuster armor. Again, that one had a theme. Versus the Mandarin, Fin Fang Foom, Red Hulk, MODOK, and Bullseye. Heroes vs. Villains Part 3, numero 3. I did Spider-Man, Thor as Jane Foster, or Jane Foster as for Nick Fury and Black Widow, versus the Lizard, Green Goblin, Loki, Taskmaster, and Crossbones. Again, some of those teams super obvious, while others a bit more random. But to close out this section, and honestly, I'm probably entertaining nobody but myself. I know I keep saying that, but I didn't know what to do for this episode, but I had fun putting these together, as I've said for like the 10th time on this episode. But to round it out, I'm going to do Marvel versus Dragon Ball Z, just to bring it full circle sort of thing. And then I'm going to cast wrestlers as characters from the 3 universes, again, just to entertain myself. But I did Marvel versus Dragon Ball Z heroes. So I've got Thor, Iron Man, Spider-Man, Hulk and Rocket Raccoon versus Goku, Vegeta, Piccolo, Future Trunks, and Krillin. And then I did Marvel versus Dragon Ball Z villains. So I have Thanos, Galactus, Ultron, Doc Ock, and Loki versus Frieza, Cell, Kid Buu, Broly, and Lord Beerus. All the destruction in this one, pun intended, of course. Beerus is the god of destruction and wanted to destroy Earth until he discovered how delicious chocolate pudding is. That's a thing. That was his reason for not destroying Earth. Go watch Dragon Ball Z. It's a good show. But just straight up ultimate Marvel vs. Dragon Ball Z with any and all characters on the table. I've got Thanos, Iron Man, Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, and Hela versus Gogeta. It was really hard choosing between Gogeta and Vegito, but Gogeta, Gotenks, Piccolo, Android 16, and Android 18. I just really love the idea of Android 16 versus Iron Man, to be honest. So it's like I kind of built that match just around those two. Maybe we'll say it comes down to Android 16 and Iron Man just manages to get the win. Again, you guys tell me who you'd pick to win, who you want to win, etc., etc. But that was my fantasy Survivor Series teams that I came up with in a half delirious state. So hopefully there was some good stuff in there. Keeping with the Survivor Series theme, I'm only going to cast 5 characters from the respective universes. Obviously, there's a lot more potential ones out there than just 5, but let me know what wrestlers you guys could see as, Dragon Ball Z, Marvel, DC, or just anime in general, or superheroes in general. It doesn't have to be Dragon Ball, Marvel, or DC, but just send me your fantasy castings. You can cast someone in Seinfeld or Friends or The Simpsons or fucking Superstore, because I've been watching that. Just let me know. Have some engagement. Start some conversation. But I'll start with DC. I got Superman. Now, obviously, John Cena's kind of the obvious choice here, so I'm not going to go that route. Plus, in the DCEU, the DC Extended Universe, Cena does currently play Peacemaker, so I'm kind of disqualifying him from the DC category. So my pick for Superman was Roman Reigns. Now, one of his signature moves is a Superman punch, but honestly, I feel like Roman is like a long-haired, dark and brooding version of Clark Kent would actually work. Maybe it's just me, but I think it'd be dope. I got Nightwing as Darby Allin. Now, originally, I had Darby as Batman, but I felt like one of the Robins kind of fit him better, and I was tossing up between Nightwing and Red Hood, but in the end, I went with the Nightwing version of Robin. I think Darby Allin is a perfect Nightwing. Lobo, I went with The Undertaker. It's pretty simple. I think The Undertaker would make a very fucking good Lobo. Batwoman, I went Becky Lynch. Originally, I had her as Batgirl, but I think Big Time Bex would be a good Batwoman. And the final DC casting, just for a little bit of humor, is Gorilla Grodd, and I have cast A-Train, aka Prince Albert. And again, entertaining nobody but myself here, but myself and Mrs. Crossfire, as I said, we've been watching old Survivor Series matches, and her reaction to seeing how hairy Albert's back was fucking hysterical. Popped the ever-loving shit out of me. And on top of that, he is a big, solid dude, so I feel he fits that role to a T. Casting wrestlers as Marvel characters, again, only doing 5. The first Marvel character I've picked is Captain America, and again, a lot of people would take John Cena for this role, but for me, Captain America is Kurt Angle, with or without hair. It doesn't matter, take your pick. I mean, it doesn't really matter when he's wearing the helmet with the outfit. Then I've got the Hulk. A lot of people would say Brock Lesnar or even Hulk Hogan, since, it's already in the name. My initial thought here was I was going to go with Batista, specifically from the 2003-2005 era when he was in Evolution. But again, much like John Cena in the DC EU, Batista's already in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the MCU, as Drax. So I've disqualified him from this as well. So my casting for Hulk ended up actually being John Cena himself. Now, obviously, you look at him, he's not like huge or anything, but the amount of physical strength that this dude possesses, it's fucking nuts. So I feel like the Incredible Hulk here has to be John Cena for his, real life strength, if nothing else. And then I went with Thor. A lot of people would say Triple H, and honestly, makes a lot of sense given the long hair and the use of the sledgehammer over the years. But for my money, I have casted Thor as Edge, or Edge as Thor, specifically current day Edge as well, because he looks really grizzled and just fucking badass. And on top of that, Edge does actually have a role in the show Vikings, so I feel like there is somewhat of a connection there, in a sense. And then I casted Ghost Rider, because originally I was going to cast The Undertaker, but then I made him Lobo, and I didn't want to overlap. So I went with kind of the next best thing, and that's The Undertaker's kayfabe younger brother, the devil's favorite demon, the big red machine, Kane. The final Marvel casting is Gamora. Now, people are probably going to find this weird, but I actually chose Dr. Britt Baker, DMD, for this casting. And it's simple. Both myself and Mrs. Crossfire, we think Britt Baker is super badass, and Gamora is a super badass, strong character in her own right. I think it fits. But you guys tell me who you think. And then I casted wrestlers as Dragon Ball Z characters. I went Master Roshi. It was Terry Funk, because he may seem old and senile, but there's still a pretty high chance that he may very well whoop your ass. And then I went with Android 18, Rhea Ripley, of course, both women, absolute badass, strong women, much like I mentioned just before with Gamora and Britt Baker, and much like Terry Funk, Rhea Ripley would probably just whoop your ass. And I popped super hard, actually, for Rhea Ripley's Vegeta-inspired gear at WrestleMania 37, while we're on the topic of Dragon Ball Z. Hercule, I cast the Lethal Weapon Steve Blackman. Now, obviously, Hercule can't match power with the Z Fighters and often runs away from trouble, but if you look at him in terms of the actual Earthlings, he was the world martial arts champion, and Steve Blackman had a martial arts gimmick, but it wasn't really just a gimmick. He is one of wrestling's true tough guys. And just like the other two, he could probably whoop yo ass. Future Trunks is AJ Styles. Now, Trunks is the son of Vegeta, making him second in line as the Prince. AJ was once known as the Prince of Phenomenal, and let's face it, look at both guys' hair. Both have majestic as fuck hair. So future Trunks is AJ Styles. And then the final one with these fantasy castings that I've just thrown through together to entertain myself is Vegeta. And I think Drew McIntyre would make a great Vegeta. I don't know about seeing Vegeta with a Scottish accent, but maybe Drew can kind of try to do an American accent. But obviously Vegeta is much shorter, like in the Dragon Ball Z show, than Drew is in real life. But if you look at their facial features and the cocky smirks that they do, they actually look a lot alike. And maybe it's just me, but I feel like Drew is like the perfect live action Vegeta, at least in terms of professional wrestlers. And I don't even care which promotion we're looking at. But nonetheless, all hail the Prince of All Saiyans. My match of the week. Before I get into the questions, this probably should have been something Survivor Series related, but since I went to the dentist, I thought it'd be a bit funny to make the match of the week this week a steel cage match, Bret Hart versus Isaac Yankem DDS, from an episode of Raw on October 16th, 1995. Of course, Dr. Isaac Yankem was the evil dentist of Jerry the King Lawler, and the man playing Isaac Yankem, Glenn Jacobs, would go on to have a pretty successful career as Kane, the aforementioned younger brother of The Undertaker. But again, that match was Raw, October 16th, 1995. Bret Hart versus Isaac Yankem DDS in a steel cage match. Big thanks to the three guys that actually sent in questions. Got a nice little handful at that, given it was only 3 people, but in fairness, I gave pretty short notice compared to the last Q&A. My bad. As I said, I kind of just threw it together, but these are all fantasy team related, so I'll give my teams, and then maybe you guys, the listeners, to kind of make a bit of interaction, can tell me who you'd book to win these matches, or who you want to win, how you think they'd win, etc., etc. But the first question came from Sean, and this is a really fucking good question. He said, in terms of fantasy booking and the 5-person teams, book heels versus faces. One from the 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and then just from whenever. Must have debuted for WWE/F in that decade. Now, I took this differently than what Sean sent it, I'm pretty sure, but I basically put my teams where I put one person each from that decade, just to mix it up and make my brain, get the cogs turning a little bit. And I did a fair few for this one, the first of which, they're pretty obvious choices, but the heels from the 80s is Roddy Piper. Technically, he did debut just in the tail end of the 70s, but he wasn't full-time in the WWF until the 80s. From the 90s, I went Triple H. 2000s was Randy Orton. 2010s was Seth Rollins. And then picking someone from any era, I went with heel Randy Savage. The faces opposing them from the 80s, Hulk Hogan. Again, he did technically debut in 79, but it still fit in, the decade of the period when Hulkamania really started running wild. 90s, Stone Cold Steve Austin. 2000s, John Cena. 2010s, Roman Reigns. Although he was being booed pretty much all the time during that time period, he was technically presented as a babyface. And from any era is The Rock. So to recap, the first match for Sean's criteria, and again, I did bend the rules slightly, but the match is Roddy Piper, Triple H, Randy Orton, Seth Rollins, and Randy Savage versus Hulk Hogan, Steve Austin, John Cena, Roman Reigns, and The Rock. Match number 2, I had the heels from the 80s, Ravishing Rick Rude. From the 90s, Shawn Michaels again, bending the rules because the debut was the tail end of the 80s, but it still fell within the 10-year period of when he was at his peak as a heel. 2000s, Chris Jericho, again, tail end of 99, but still in the 10-year period that he was, at his peak sort of thing. 2010s, Kevin Owens, and from any decade, Owen Hart. The faces in this match, from the 80s, Ricky Steamboat, from the 90s, Bret Hart, again, barely fits into the decade, even though his debut was technically in the 80s. 2000s, Kurt Angle, bending the rules again. 2010, Daniel Bryan, and from any era, Dean Malenko. So to recap, that's Rick Rude, Shawn Michaels, Chris Jericho, Kevin Owens, Owen Hart versus Ricky Steamboat, Bret Hart, Kurt Angle, Daniel Bryan, and Dean Malenko. You saw the theme that I'm trying to go with here. I'm trying to make all these ones kind of fit in. We had the faces of the company. We had the biggest stars kind of all time in the company for the first one. We had the smaller guys, minus Rick Rude, but still very flamboyant. All the flamboyant guys versus the technical guys for the second one. And the third one that I've put together for Sean's criteria was the heels. For the 80s, I have Mr. Perfect. From the 90s, Ric Flair. 2000s, JBL. Again, the man debuted in the 90s, but the JBL character didn't take off until early to mid-2000s. And 2010, I had Wade Barrett. And then from any era, I had my boy, Dolph Ziggler. The faces I had from the 80s was Tito Santana. The 90s, Eddie Guerrero. Obviously, early 2000s was where he really took off as a face, though. 2000s is Rey Mysterio. 2010s is Kalisto. And from any era, it's Ultimo Dragon. A nice little mix of lucha versus a bunch of despicable, dirty heels, bunch of evil men. So to recap, that was Mr. Perfect, Ric Flair, JBL, Wade Barrett, and Dolph Ziggler versus Tito Santana, Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, Kalisto, and Ultimo Dragon. And the fourth and final match for Sean's criteria was, for the heels, from the 80s I have Jake the Snake Roberts, the 90s is Kane, 2000s is Mordecai / Kevin Thorne, pick whichever gimmick you prefer from him. 2010s is Sami Zayn. Sami's currently doing some of the best heel work ever right now, and obviously the original heel turn started just at the tail end of the 2010s, and I like the contrast of having all these evil-ish characters and then just having one little weasel thrown in there. And then from any era, I had The Fiend, Bray Wyatt. The faces I had from the 80s, The Ultimate Warrior. The 90s was The Undertaker. 2000s was Mr. America. And no, I'm not joking, brother. 2010 was Dean Ambrose. And from any era, I had Mankind. So to recap that one, we have Jake the Snake Roberts, Kane, Mordecai / Kevin Thorne, Sami Zayn, and The Fiend versus Ultimate Warrior, Undertaker, Mr. America, Dean Ambrose, and Mankind. And I apologize a final time for Sean. And I apologize a final time to Sean for kind of bending the rules and kind of changing your question to an extent. But I feel like all four of those matches would be compelling, at least in my opinion. The second question came from my good friend Nick Maltino. Nick has comprised a team from SmackDown, and he wanted me to combat it with a team from Raw. He had 2003 Kurt Angle, Rey Mysterio, Eddie Guerrero, JBL, and Charlie Haas. Both Nick and I agreed that Charlie Haas was severely underrated in the early 2000s when he was on SmackDown. And to combat this team, I actually had a lot of trouble putting this team together because I didn't want to go too obvious in terms of big stars, but let's face it, in the original brand split, Raw did kind of have the bulk of the star power. So ultimately I decided on 2006 King of Kings Triple H as the team captain, Shawn Michaels, 2004 Randy Orton. I almost went for 2009 or current Randy Orton, but then he kind of would have almost had to be the captain, and I really wanted 06 Triple H to be the captain. Chris Jericho, you can take him from any era, but I was thinking of Y2J from 01 to 04/5 when I put this together. And then to combat Charlie Haas, I have 04/05 Shelton Benjamin, a dude that should have been world champion, damn it. The fact that he didn't at least have a small run with the World Heavyweight Championship boggles my fucking mind. It really does. But to recap, we have Team SmackDown, or Team Nick Maltino, Kurt Angle, Rey Mysterio, Eddie Guerrero, JBL, and Charlie Haas versus Team Raw, or in this case, I guess, Team Crossfire, Triple H, Shawn Michaels, Randy Orton, Chris Jericho, and Shelton Benjamin. The third and final question comes from Dolan, but Dolan did kind of like A, B, C, and D with these questions, and they were really fucking good. Like, they got my mind all working. And again, much like, all the random ones I did at the start of the episode, these were kind of put together at like 3, 4 in the morning. So I'm hoping they're good. They seem good to me, but I'm going to read them back. Basically, the question was, do Survivor Series style teams for WWE versus AEW, Impact versus New Japan Pro Wrestling, Ring of Honor versus NWA, and ECW versus GCW. That's a lot of wrestling, but I certainly did my best to answer all of these for you, Dolan. We'll start with the WWE versus AEW. I'm going to go in the order that you wrote them. Now, I have a handful of these. The first of which is John Cena, Randy Orton, Seth Rollins, and the Usos versus Kenny Omega, the Young Bucks, Matt and Nick Jackson, Hangman Page, and Jon Moxley. Match number 2 in the WWE versus AEW is the New Day, all 3 guys, Big E, Kofi Kingston, and Xavier Woods, all hail King Woods, Ricochet, and Rey Mysterio. So that's the New Day, Ricochet, and Rey Mysterio versus the Death Triangle, Pentagon, Phoenix, and Pac, and Private Party, Isaiah Cassidy, and Mark Quinn. Match number 3 in the WWE versus AEW, I have Roman Reigns, Drew McIntyre, AJ Styles, Finn Balor, and Jeff Hardy versus Brian Cage, Lance Archer, Jurassic Express, of course, Jungle Boy and Luchasaurus, and Matt Hardy. And for the final one for WWE versus AEW, and obviously there is so many more, but I didn't want to bore you guys by just, reading names for an hour. But I have The Miz, John Morrison, Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn, and Samoa Joe versus MJF, Darby Allin, CM Punk, Sammy Guevara, and Wardlow. Again, that's barely scratching the surface, but I personally would dig the hell out of all of these matches, hence why I chose them. Impact versus New Japan. Match 1, I have Team X Division. Trey Miguel, of course, the current X Division champion, as I record this, Chris Sabin and Alex Shelley, Chris Bay, and Ace Austin versus Team Junior Heavyweight. I have the current Junior Heavyweight champion, El Desperado. He did just defeat Robbie Eagles. Big sad there, but of course, Robbie's still one half of the Junior Tag Team Champions in New Japan with Tiger Mask. But I have El Desperado, Hiromu Takahashi, El Phantasmo, Robbie Eagles, and Tiger Mask, the Junior Tag Champions I just mentioned. So just to recap, that was Team X Division, Trey Miguel, Chris Sabin, Alex Shelley, Chris Bay, and Ace Austin versus El Desperado, Hiromu Takahashi, El Phantasmo, Robbie Eagles, and Tiger Mask. Match number 2, I had Eddie Edwards, Sami Callihan, Eric Young, Rich Swann, and Moose versus Kota Ibushi, Kazuchika Okada, Tetsuya Naito, Hiroshi Tanahashi, and Minoru Suzuki. Match number 3, some of these guys are about to repeat each other because this is like all time now for both companies. And I've made it a 12-man tag, so 6 versus 6. I have Team TNA / Impact. I've got AJ Styles, Samoa Joe, Christopher Daniels, Beer Money, of course, James Storm, and Bobby Roode. And then rounding out the team is Kurt Angle versus Kenny Omega, Kazuchika Okada, Tetsuya Naito, Will Ospreay, Marty Scurll, and Kota Ibushi. Goddamn, I am such a mark, but I wouldn't have it any other way. And for Ring of Honor versus NWA, we have Match 1, Team ROH, Jay Lethal, Matt Taven, Brody King, and the Briscoes, of course, Mark and Jay Briscoe, versus Nick Aldis, Chris Adonis, Crimson, Matt Cross, and Tim Storm. And then with Match 2 for Ring of Honor versus NWA, I did an all-time for both promotions with that one as well. I went Team Ring of Honor, Kevin Steen, Adam Cole, Jay Lethal, AJ Styles, and CM Punk versus Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes, Ricky Steamboat, Nick Aldis, and Mr. Anderson. Again, pretty random lineup, but also a pretty damn splooshy match, in my opinion. The final one in this question was ECW versus GCW, and this was probably the hardest one, as so many people came and went throughout the days of ECW, and now in present day they're doing the same with GCW, so it's hard to know, who's the official roster, I guess, but I feel like you're going to like my matches here, Dolan. As is everyone else that's listening, if they've listened this far, I hope. Match number 1, we have Team ECW. We've got RVD, Rob Van Dam, Sabu, Sandman, Tommy Dreamer, and Raven versus Team GCW of John Moxley, Joey Janela, Chris Dickerson, Shane Mercer, and RSP, Ricky Shane Page, my boy, and I know he's Dolan's boy as well. We just had that conversation about a week or so ago upon recording this. For match number 2, we had Team ECW, New Jack, the Dudley Boys, Bubba Ray and Devon, Chris Candido, Too Cold Scorpio versus Team GCW, Nick Gage, Atticus Kogar, Jimmy Lloyd, Tony Deppen, and Too Cold Scorpio present day. This is a fantasy card after all, so why can't Too Cold Scorpio be on both teams? Huh? Match number 3, we have Team ECW, Taz, the man this episode's named after, Cactus Jack, the Eliminators, Perry Saturn and John Cronus, and Bam Bam Bigelow versus Team GCW's Alex Colon, Schlack, Calvin Tankman, and the current GCW Tag Team Champions upon recording this, Mark and Jay Briscoes. So again, just to recap, Taz, Cactus Jack, Perry Saturn, John Cronus, and Bam Bam Bigelow versus Alex Colon, Schlack, Calvin Tankman, Mark, and Jay Briscoe. And the fourth and final match, which I'm actually going to end the podcast on, is Team ECW, Terry Funk, Shane Douglas, Marky Whipwreck, Spike, Dudley, and Mike Awesome versus Matt Cardona, Effie, Alley Cat, or Alley Catch as she's now known, Minoru Suzuki, and Marco Stunt. We've got to have that Marco Stunt versus Spike Dudley and Marco Stunt versus Mikey Whipwreck match. There's still quite a few people from the ECW roster, like Rhino, FBI, Super Crazy, Just Incredible, just to name a few. So maybe you, Dolan, or maybe even the people listening, you can take Rhino, 2 members of the FBI, Super Crazy and Just Incredible, and put them against 5 guys that I haven't said from the GCW roster, or, repeat people if you want, because I have repeated people throughout this, entire episode. So if they overlap, people/characters, it doesn't matter. But yeah, maybe take those guys, Rhino, 2 members of the FBI, Super Crazy and Just Incredible, and pit them against 5 people from GCW. Because off the top of my head, I can't think of that, but they're just names that just came to me that I didn't mention that could have been mentioned. You got guys like Psychosis as well, Lance Storm, Steve Corino's another one. There's just so many great options out there. And that's the great thing about being a mark. All the fantasy booking is, it's kind of like a Marvel what-if situation, but wrestling really needs like a what-if TV show similar to Marvel. Like, I don't know how you do it because obviously, WWE have the rights to so many different things, but even if you just went what-if with ECW, WWE/F, and WCW, like, that'd be fucking dope, in my opinion. But that's just a complete, sidebar, just a rant. But that will bring me to a close for this week's episode. As I stated at the very start, kind of pulled this episode out of my ass, but I did have fun, answering the couple of questions that I got and putting together all of those random ass Survivor Series matches for Dragon Ball Z, Marvel, and DC. And as I said, it's a good precursor to next week's episode where me and my lovely wife, Mrs. Crossfire, we will be doing a fantasy Survivor Series card for the year of 2021. Of course, that's the year we're in when I'm recording this. If you managed to get this far through the entire thing, then kudos to you, because Lord knows my ADHD ass went all over the place while doing this. But as always, don't forget, check the link tree below in the description of the episode for all of my social media pages and my Pro Wrestling Tees store. The song of the week was War Machine by Kiss. The match of the week was Bret Hart versus Isaac Yankem from Raw, October 16th, 1995. I am the essential John L. Crossfire, and as always, you were just caught in conversation, but for today, beat me if you can. Survive if I let you. I really hope that Taz doesn't try and sue me.